Welcome to the TMRN Time Monk Radio Network. I'm Jules, and today is Sunday, the 21st of August 2011, or the 22nd in Asia. Today we have renowned commodities trader Jim Rogers. Jim's websites are jimrogers.com and jimrogers1.blogspot.com. Hi Jim, and welcome to the WebBot Forum Roundtable.
Well, I'm delighted to be here, Jules. Just one slight correction. That second website you mentioned is not mine. It's someone who set up a website in my name. There apparently a lot of people have set up websites and Facebooks and everything else in my name. I only have the one. That's not so, it's not so important, but just a slight correction. Anyway, I'm delighted to be here.
Thank you, sir. It's jimrogers.com. Thanks. The WebBot Forum administrator and producer of the show is Fox, and he'll be doing the recording and technical support of the show. Several members of the forum were kind enough to join us tonight. They include members Green Meadow, Plain, and Turd Ferguson. For listeners, this interview will assume you have a good understanding of Jim's work, which includes his books and numerous interviews with Jim on YouTube. Again, Jim's website is jimrogers.com. This interview will be available on YouTube for free on the WebBot Forum channel and at the website webbotforum.com. Jim, are you comfortable and ready for the interview, sir?
Yes. Just one word of note. I am on my bicycle, so if you hear me huffing and puffing, I'm not having a heart attack. Or if I am, you'll be the first to know.
Yes, and we can call, I don't even know what number to call in Singapore. Anyway, the first question we have is from Turd Ferguson.
Jim, good morning, I should say, in Singapore. Thank you very much for joining us. It is really a pleasure to get a chance to visit with you.
My pleasure.
I'm sorry, it falls to me to ask you just a couple of quick questions about current events. You're certainly an expert in all things commodity, and there are so many interesting goings-on in the world, specifically after what took place in Washington a couple of weeks ago with the debt ceiling negotiations and what ultimately became the raise of the debt ceiling. With the struggling U.S. economy and the struggling global economy and the Euro crisis, there's a lot of questions these days if the Fed is going to initiate another round of quantitative easing or perhaps some reverse repurchase arrangements, something to get banks lending and get some more liquidity out there. They have a meeting in Jackson Hole, I think, next weekend. I just wanted to get your thoughts as to what might come out of that.
Thanks, Ted. Well, they already have started quantitative easing. They're trying to disguise it. They don't want to admit that they're doing it, but they've announced that they're going to keep interest rates low for 2 years. The only way you can do that is to interfere in the markets or, go into the market and keep rates down. You can't just say it out loud. That doesn't make it happen. So they're already in the markets holding interest rates down, and they have to stay in the markets to keep interest rates down because interest rates eventually are going to go much higher after all this absurdity. Now, even if they ever announce something, I'm sure they're going to continue to try to disguise it and call it something else. They've already fooled a lot of people with this most recent announcement. I don't know, maybe they'll call it cupcakes. Who knows what they'll call it? But they're going to intervene. They're going to do their best. It's just leading to the demise and the disaster for all of us.
Well, and I guess that's a good segue into the second question, in that it would seem to me that we are rapidly approaching the end game of unlimited fiat money and Keynesian economics. And one of the signs of that we maybe saw last week with the announcement out of Venezuela that they wanted to repatriate their gold and bring it back. And I've wondered for some time now if individual countries won't look to back their own currency with hard assets, with gold, silver, and other things, kind of preparing for the world where the U.S. does not have the reserve currency anymore. Do you think that move out of Venezuela is the beginning of a trend? Is it something that we should all be keeping our eyes on, or is it not really significant at all?
Well, no, it's certainly significant, especially if they want their gold back and they find out they don't have it.
That's right.
It'll be quite a turmoil if all of a sudden the banks say, oh, we don't have that gold anymore. We can't find it, because a lot of gold has been mixed with other gold, and so we'll see. It may just mean that more and more people do want to hold their own gold in their own hands. I would suspect so. We're coming into more and more turmoil. More and more banks will be going bankrupt. And last thing you want is for your gold to be in a vault of a bank which goes bankrupt or which has to suspend redemptions. So I suspect you will see more of it.
And in the end, do you expect other sovereign nations to maybe band together with regional reserve currencies, or will just nations themselves? You're close to China. I know that's part of the reason you're in Singapore. Do you expect the Chinese to back the renminbi at some point with gold?
Well, I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. It may happen if and when the world really sinks into terrible crisis, and we certainly have more, at least semi-crises coming in the future. And at some point, the world may be so in such a catastrophe that the world will reach for gold. I don't see anybody doing that anytime soon. Gold does impose restrictions on politicians, and politicians don't want anything that imposes restrictions. If it happened, it would be because the public, the people, insisted on something like gold. There probably will come a time like that again, but I'm afraid that's not anytime soon. Or I shouldn't say I'm afraid. I should say I don't think that's anytime soon.
Right. Thank you, Jim.
Jim, it's Jules here. What type of crises do you see? One of the things we watch, obviously, I believe, if not recently, but the death cross, the Dow 50-day moving average, crossing on the downside to the 200-day moving average. So in terms of the mini crises that you see in the future, what do you think could possibly take place in the next few weeks, say, for example?
Well, I'm not a very good market timer, Jules. In fact, I'm a horrible market timer, so I don't know about the next few weeks. But I will say that we're going to see more bankruptcies, more turmoil in the currency markets, especially in the currency markets. The largest creditor nations in the world now are all in Asia: China, Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Japan, Singapore. This is where the assets are. You know who the debtors are and where they are. Those kinds of imbalances are normally sorted out in the currency markets and other markets. Used to be in the gold market, but since we're not on the gold standard anymore, it's in the currency markets. And you're going to see a lot more turmoil. You're going to see more inflation. You're going to see more stock market collapses. No, these are perilous times.
Thanks, Jim. Speaking of creditor nations, China is a great culture, but we continually hear from the mainstream financial channels and even alternative media like Jim Rickards that they are hamstrung to the US government because of their large reserves of treasury bills. I believe 1.16 trillion as of the last Treasury International Capital Report in June. Also from that report, it seems that China was more or less the only one buying long-term treasury with the first net sale of US paper since 2009 May. China has a rich and long history, and I would think that the Chinese government would know what was coming down the pipeline for the US dollar and have some sort of exit strategy or end game. What is your opinion of the China versus US situation, treasury reserve situation, and China's end game in getting out of the dollar and not left holding the bag?
Well, it's a very good question. China has certainly slowed down its purchases of treasuries, U.S. treasuries, compared to where they were before. And I suspect you're going to see less and less in the future. In the meantime, China has a couple of trillion with a T of other assets, and they are continuing to diversify into other things. You probably know they're buying up as much of Africa and South America and Central Asia as they can. They're buying mines, plantations, oil fields, because they think that there's a shortage of raw materials coming. I happen to think the same thing. So they're doing their best to prepare. They're being good capitalists. In fact, they're being extremely good capitalists. So I think you're going to see more and more of their assets going into things like real assets or perhaps other currencies. More likely real assets than other currencies, but maybe some of both. Now, yes, if the U.S. does stop paying or reneges in some way, China will suffer. The whole world will suffer. The U.S. will suffer more, but I'd rather be the creditor than the debtor any day, even if I'm the stiffed creditor, even if I'm the creditor who has a deadbeat on my hands, because that means I do have other assets and other options.
And that's probably why Joe Biden's there at the moment. The next question is from Turd Ferguson.
All right, Jim. Many regular folks are turning to commodities and hard assets in order to protect their life savings and their purchasing power. But investing in commodities, as you know, is significantly different from investing in paper assets. And a lot of folks are prone to making what we call beginner mistakes. I just thought, with all of your experience, are there some pointers, some tips that you might pass along to all those who are getting into this game for the first time?
Well, let me first say that commodities are a lot simpler than stocks. I didn't say they were easy. I just said they're a lot simpler. Nobody can understand Toyota or IBM, not even the CEO. You know, they have hundreds of thousands of employees and suppliers and markets and factories. Nobody can, and governments, nobody can understand most companies. But cotton is fairly simple. Again, Turd, I didn't say it was easy, but it's sure a lot easier to understand cotton. We know what it is. We use it every day, most people. And what you have to do is figure out whether there's too much cotton or too little cotton. I didn't say that was easy. You know, there are millions of people every day trying to figure that out and get rich. But if you can do your homework, and I wouldn't invest in anything or suggest investing in anything unless one understands it and has done a lot of homework themselves. I wouldn't listen to anybody you hear on the radio, the internet, TV, including me, anybody you read in the newspapers. The only way you're going to be successful at anything is to do your own research, your own homework, and then when you think you understand what you're doing and you think you've got some money lying in the corner, but all you have to do is go and pick it up, that's when you act. Don't jump around. One mistake that many people in markets make is they think they have to be doing something all the time. No, that's a terrible mistake. The best thing you can do as an investor is do nothing most of the time. I mean, unless you're a day trader or something like that, a short-term trader. Most fortunes are made by guys who wait until they find something that they know is a sure thing or nearly a sure thing, and then they jump in with both feet. I would urge people to do the same thing with commodities, not invest. The mistakes people make in the commodities are nearly always the same mistakes they made in anything, but I do urge people to understand that if you do your homework, commodities are easier to understand than stocks.
Just kind of a follow-up question to that, Jim. Do you, a lot of folks are getting started with the kind of a hybrid product of commodity ETFs or even exchange-traded notes too. Do you like that idea? Do you find that's a good way for people to put a toe in the water?
Well, it would depend on who's backing it and who's administering it. But yes, if you do your research and you're sure that it's sound, by all means. It's you make a lot more money in futures, Turd, as you know, because of the leverage. I mean, you only have to put down 5 or 10%, and you can buy huge amounts of most commodities. You cannot do that with stocks or ETFs. Having said that, if you understand specific commodities, ETFs are a way. I presume you're talking about ETFs on specific commodities, then yes. But I will quickly add, Turd, that the studies show that most people are better off investing in indexes, no matter what the asset class. As you well know, passive investing outperforms active managers 70 or 75% of the time, year after year after year. So most people, if they decide to invest in commodities, having done their homework, investing in an index is the best way to invest. But that's true of stocks, bonds, currencies, and everything else.
Jim, that's fabulous. Thank you.
Jim, this is Plain. Some argue that one of China's advantages over most Western economies is that its central bank is state-owned and aligned to lead to productive economic growth, while Western central banks are designed for the interests of financiers. Do you think that Western central banks may fail, and do you see much hope of the West moving more towards the Chinese model of industrial development as opposed to financial and speculative development?
Plain in the U.S., we've had 3 central banks in our history. The first 2 disappeared for a variety of reasons. In my view, this one's going to disappear too. Between Greenspan and Bernanke, they keep making so many unbelievable mistakes that they're going to destroy the central bank, which in my view, in this particular case, will be good because they're really making the world worse instead of better. Now, the world without central banks, or without a country without a central bank, has problems, but in the world we're living in now, most central banks are making things worse, certainly in the U.S. The U.S. Central Bank had a balance sheet with about $800 billion of government bonds 3 years ago. Now they've tripled it, and it's mainly garbage and junk. And plus, they're printing huge amounts of money, which is making the world more unstable and leading to more inflation and artificially low interest rates. And artificially low interest rates, once they go back to their normal, will overshoot on the upside, and we will have higher interest rates than we would have expected otherwise. So, yes, I expect this central bank in the U.S. to disappear. The one in the U.K. probably will, at least in its present incarnation. Will they go to the Chinese model? Well, probably, just given that politicians like to have as much control as they possibly can. So it's not good that politicians necessarily have control, but that's undoubtedly what will happen in the next reincarnation.
Okay, but then I guess the question is, would that move the West more towards industrial development? I mean, some say that one of the great advantages of China is that their leaders tend to be engineers, as opposed to, say, American Britain with all these lawyers. Any thoughts on that?
The Chinese are, in my view, one of the reasons they're so successful is they have this very, very high rate of savings and investing. I think most economists, including Karl Marx, realize that you have to develop capital in order to develop an economy. Without capital and savings and investing, it's very difficult to develop your economy. In the U.S. and the West, but certainly the U.S. anyway, we have had recently a negative savings rate. You know, we're using up our capital at a rapid rate. Government spending is certainly not building new capital, investment capital, or any kind of capital in the U.S. So it's going to take a lot more than just changing the central bank. No country in history that's gotten itself into this kind of debtor situation has gotten itself out without a crisis or a semi-crisis. So we will undoubtedly have our crisis or our semi-crises, and eventually, after lots of bankruptcies and pain and agony, then we will start over. A debt will be wiped out, and we will then save, invest. Everybody will be panicked and scared as they were after the 1930s. And then conceivably the U.S. can have a more prosperous future. But this debt, we're the largest debtor nation in the history of the world, Plain. Not the largest debtor nation in the world, the largest in the history of the world. So this is not going to be solved just by changing the central bank or even the central bankers.
Well, then I guess a related question would be that crisis or a series of crises that you see, might they resemble the end of the USSR? In other words, a crash where you have to slough off the fringes and, cut your military 80% and go through a lot of suffering.
Well, undoubtedly, yes. I don't know if it'll be like the collapse of the USSR. I don't think that Alaska is going to suddenly be an independent state, or Hawaii, or even Florida, although certainly people in the U.S. who would like to secede from the U.S.
Well, but I was arguing more that we have, American Samoa, and, we have a lot of bases around the world. We don't call them part of the country exactly, but, we have a fairly, one could argue an imperialistic policy at times?
Well, we have troops stationed in over 120 countries around the world, including places like you mentioned. The kind of crisis that I'm talking about is certainly going to lead to a serious, major cutback in our military commitments abroad. We can't afford it anymore. That's one reason we're going broke. The British, in 1918, if you looked at a map of the world plain, it was all red because the British Empire was everywhere. But within one generation, the UK was in economic shambles, and within 3 generations, they were bankrupt. They couldn't sell government bonds. The IMF had to bail them out within 3 generations, and they cut back enormously. They didn't have troops. I mean, they had a few troops here and there, but no, massive military installations that the Brits had, even in 1918, disappeared. Now you have very few British troops anywhere, even in the UK. So no, that will certainly happen to the U.S.
Well, that's certainly something that we're all wondering about. It just looks like we go from one expansion to another. It seems almost endless. Now there's talk of going into Syria. So where will it end is the question. It will end,
as I said, in a financial crisis or semi-crisis when we realize we cannot afford it anymore. Or maybe we'll, some country will run us off. The Vietnamese did it. I mean, it could certainly happen that we could get, quote, defeated in some of these adventures that we're starting, partly because we don't have the money. I was with the head of the Air Force a year or two ago, and he told me that the average plane in the U.S. military is 28 years old. He told me he had grandfathers who'd flown a plane, fathers who'd flown the plane, and now the grandson was flying the plane because they're so old. Our military personnel is worn out. Some of these guys have been abroad 3 or 4 times in wars in the recent years. The hardware, the software, the people, everything is overextended. So we're shooting ourselves in the foot in more ways than one.
I think our feet already hurt.
Oh,
yeah, it certainly looks like...
And her feet hurt from what they're doing. It is ludicrous.
Yeah, it certainly just looks like we're going from bad to worse. Well, thank you for that. Now I'll turn you over to Green Meadow.
Hi, Jim. This is Green Meadow. I have a question about GMO seeds and corporate agriculture companies. Monsanto has been a profitable company, but there's been more and more backlash and concern about the consequences of GMO seeds on health. There have also been some problems with the economics and politics of corporate agriculture. For example, in the Iraq peace agreement, farmers must buy seeds from the U.S. You've also commented on a lack of farmers, but small farmers cannot compete economically or politically with corporate petrochemical farms. Some see food replacing oil as the next global control mechanism. How do you see this power struggle involving GMO seeds and corporate agriculture playing out?
Well, one reason we have a shortage of farmers is because farming has been such a horrible business for everybody, for nearly everybody, for 30 years. Green Meadow, the average age of farmers in America is 58. In Australia, the average age is 58. In Japan, it's 66. I mean, everybody listening to this is probably reasonably well educated, but very few people you went to school with, if any, became farmers. And that's true all over the world. So farming is going to be extremely attractive for everybody going forward because prices are going to go so high that we have to have an attractive sector again, agriculture. Now, whenever an industry or a sector becomes very profitable and exciting, even the fringe players make fortunes, and that will and the small players and the individuals will make fortunes. So that's going to happen again. If prices of food don't go much higher, we're not going to have any food at any price, Green. I mean, if you think about it, in 10 years, those farmers are going to be 68, if they're still alive. And unless you or all the listeners on this program are going to go into the fields and work 12 hours a day in the hot sun for nothing, then we're not going to have any food. So prices are going to go much, much higher. It's going to be much more exciting, much more profitable, and great fortunes are going to be made by everybody.
So what do you think of Monsanto and other companies like that trying to corner the market on seeds?
Well, it's a thankless task. They're not going to be able to because, as I just explained, it's going to be agriculture is going to be so profitable that lots of people, instead of going into their garages and tinkering with their computers, are going to be going in their garages and tinkering with ways to make money in agriculture, whether that's seed or fertilizer or whatever. We're going to have lots of technological breakthroughs and new discoveries, new advances, just as has happened in every great bull market in history. There's nothing like the prospects of making a fortune to attract brains, capital, know-how, etc.
So do you see food replacing oil as a control mechanism in the globe?
Well, I'm not quite sure what you mean by a control mechanism, but yes, the shortages of food are going to lead to the situation where those who have food are clearly going to be in a much more powerful position than those who don't have food. And the inventories of food right now worldwide are near historic lows. And again, it's not a question of, a bad crop here or a drought there or something. It's a question that we have been consuming more than we've been producing for something like a decade now. Partly because we don't have the farmers. Partly because world economies have been getting better. There are 3 billion people in Asia, billion with a B, who want to live the way you live there in the U.S. They're working hard, saving, investing. So yes, countries that have food and can produce food are going to be much better off. It's one of the cards with the aces which America has. We can feed ourselves, and that is it's going to be a great attraction in the U.S. in the next few years, and that's one of the things that's going to cause certainly a revival or rally in the U.S.'s situation. It's not enough to save the U.S., but it's certainly going to give the U.S. a card, an ace in the hole it didn't have before.
Yeah, we do have a fabulous bread basket, certainly.
Well, we do, but it's too facing problems. I mean, the whole aquifer down in the Southwest, the water table in the Southwest, I'm told by people who claim they know, is under terrible duress and stress, and that within the decade, there's not going to be agriculture in the Southwest because the aquifer is draining so fast or being used so fast. So, and we do have some excess land in the U.S. which can be brought into production, but we're not what we used to be. We're not Brazil, for instance. Brazil has huge amounts of land which can be brought into production. Africa has huge amounts of land which can be brought into production. And so if you want to be a farmer, or if you want to marry a farmer, I would suggest going to Brazil or Africa or some of the places where fortunes are going to be even bigger and better. So
I'll keep that in mind. Thank you.
I mean, anybody listening to this, there are lots of women farmers too. If guys are looking for a rich and smart wife, that's the place to go.
Thank you.
Yeah, and there's a show in Australia called Farmer Meets a Wife, actually, and I watch that regularly. Let's pass it over to Turd Ferguson.
Hello again, Jim. I'm asking this question on behalf of WebBot member Echelon. And Echelon wants to know, in taking a snapshot of the events of the last week in the market and Washington's lack of leadership and the fact that nothing has changed in regard to the debt, are you willing to say that we are past the point of no return for some type of dramatic event, say a return to March 2009 Dow levels, a double-dip recession or a partial dollar devaluation, a bank holiday, something like that? What do you think was the most likely thing to happen in the near future, say before the end of the year, early next?
We're having dramatic events. There's social unrest in much of the world. There's going to be much more social unrest. Apparently Libya has just collapsed today. India, you may well see total chaos in India in the next few days or weeks. You saw what happened in the UK a week or two ago. We're having dramatic events, and there are going to be more. You're going to see more governments collapse. You're going to see more countries collapse, and it's partially because the world economy is in trouble, and because we do have serious inflation, and especially the price of food is going to go through the roof, as I explained before. Now, Turd, when the price of copper goes up, most people don't know and they don't care. But when the price of sugar and wheat go up and go up a lot, everybody knows, and everybody knows it that day. And they're really unhappy because their salaries are not going up, especially in times like we have now. So you're going to see more serious social unrest, including in the U.S. We're already starting to have it, apparently. It's not making the press too much, but these things called, what are they, flash mobs or something? It's starting to happen. So prepare yourself. We're going to see a lot more turmoil and chaos, which is also going to be reflected in stock markets, currency markets, commodity markets. The key is to, if you're an investor, of course, is to own the right things and to be short the right things. My own portfolio, I'm mainly long commodities, especially gold and silver and agriculture, and I'm long currencies, and I'm short emerging markets such as India, and I'm short technology stocks in the U.S. I'm also short a very large American financial institution. Now, I don't know if I'm right or not, but in the kind of turmoil and social unrest I see coming, I hope those things will see me through.
And living in Singapore won't hurt, that's for sure. Probably not a lot of flash mobs in Singapore, are there?
No. I mean, it's not why we came to Singapore, but as the world is developing, it's certainly, we think, a good place to be, at least for the foreseeable future.
Thanks, Jim.
Hi, Jim. In recent history, since the Second World War, I read that every time the gold and Dow ratio reached 7-1, it's happened twice in history, recent history. Within 2 years, the Dow and gold ratio came down to a 1-1 ratio. Dow crossed the 7-1 ratio approximately 3 weeks ago. Do you think this will happen again this time round? And understanding that you're not a technical analyst, what do you think the crossover point will be? For example, Dow 6,000, gold $6,000 per ounce.
Well, Jules, I was not aware of that fact, and I have been in the investment world long enough to know that many things like that have happened often, and this has only happened twice, do not happen again. I learned long ago not to invest on something that has happened often, because every time, it's different, and that always takes place. So, but to answer your question, I told you I'm short stocks. I'm long gold. I'm long precious metals. I'm long agriculture. So I expect more moves in that direction, whether it goes to 1-to-1 or when or why, and at what level, I don't have a clue. If the U.S. dollar becomes confetti, which it probably will at some point, then who knows? I mean, gold could go to 100,000. I mean, you pick the number, because the currency will be worthless at that point. That's happened to other currencies in history, and the way we're going in the U.S., that can certainly happen, not this year, but certainly sometime in our lifetimes. We can have serious currency debasement, and the value of the money will go to nothing, or nearly nothing. And if that's the case, there is no high price for gold, or rice, or anything else. Everything will shoot to the moon because the currency is being destroyed.
Okay. As you mentioned, as the US dollar moves towards confetti, the COMEX continues to raise margin requirements. I think it did it 3 to 4 times a couple of months ago on silver, and recently did it with gold because of gold's rise. So, that having been said, do you think there is a chance that eventually these margin requirements fail and maybe the COMEX collapses?
Oh, no. Well, the COMEX certainly could collapse. I don't think if the COMEX collapses, Jules, if the COMEX collapses, you and I probably collapse too. Then, the social unrest is going to be, it's going to be war. It's going to be civil war and war if it gets that far. I own gold and silver. I was glad to see the COMEX raise margin requirements on both. I don't want gold and silver to turn into a bubble anytime soon. The best money is made in markets that go up, consolidate, go up, consolidate, et cetera, for years. Things that go straight up turn into bubbles, and bubbles always pop with disastrous results for people who are long them. So far, I'm not against what the COMEX has done. I hope that they continue to maintain sound margin requirements for themselves as well as for the world. Because, as I said, if the COMEX collapses, then we've all got serious, serious problems. And when I say COMEX, I mean all commodity markets. If commodity markets collapse, we're all in serious trouble, because it's very difficult for a commodity exchange to collapse given the nature of the beast. With commodities, if you buy rice today, you put up the money today. It's not like in stocks where you have 3 or 4 or 5 days to settle, depending on the market. In commodities, you put up the money that day, or your position is reversed. So it's difficult for a reasonably well-run commodities exchange to collapse, unless something really staggering happens. But if something that staggering happens, we probably collapse too.
Yeah, very true. The next question is from Plain.
Hi, Jim. I've got a question from our forum members, Ground Rod and Acorn Sales. Thinking about all the massive global events that are occurring right now, economic and otherwise, isn't it reasonably possible that there could be a global fiat currency crisis if somehow problems aren't fixed? And if that were to occur, how do you think it would transpire? Would it be, say, the euro collapses first and then in a month the dollar would collapse? Or would markets freeze up and, capital controls, exchange controls? How do you think that would play out, and what part would derivatives play in all this?
No, I fully expect to play out with, as I said before, the kinds of imbalances we have in the world now have always been corrected or rectified in the currency markets, gold market when we had the gold standard, and that's going to happen again. I hope I will be smart enough to own the right currencies, but there may be a time, it may be soon, where none of us are going to own paper money. We're going to all flee paper money and go into real assets because of what's happening. There are philosophically, there are only 2 or 3 sound currencies anymore, the Singapore dollar being one of the, I can't even think of 3, but certainly the Singapore dollar is still, they are determined to maintain a sound currency. But the problem with doing that for any nation is, if you have a sound currency when everybody else is debasing theirs, then you go bankrupt because you can't compete anymore. So every politician in the world now knows how to buy votes. Even the Swiss are out there, debasing their currency. So there may be a time soon when everybody's going to have real assets, and the value of all currencies is going to continue to decline, and the price of silver and rice and natural gas, commodities, real things, is going to go to prices that nobody can conceive of, including me, and I'm the bull.
Well, it could happen. What about derivatives? Do you think they would be the thing that pushes everything off the cliff, or what do you think?
Well, let me just go back to the last point because you asked about exchange controls. I do fully expect exchange controls, more exchange controls. They're already rearing their ugly head, as you probably know, Brazil, some countries. So I would certainly expect exchange controls in the U.S. I have moved as many of my assets out of the U.S. as I possibly can because I expect serious exchange controls in the foreseeable future there. It will only make the situation worse, but that's what politicians always, throughout history, throughout the world, have resorted to. So, yes, we're going to see more exchange controls. And again, I just hope I don't have my money trapped in any countries that have them. Derivatives, well, if by derivatives you mean futures, as I said before, are going to have a major place because commodities and currencies are going to have a lot of turmoil and a lot of activity. So anybody in the futures market who knows what he's doing is going to make a lot of money. If by derivatives you mean things like subprime mortgages and some of the paper that people have come up with, no, you're probably going to see plenty of bankruptcies in that area. I mean, the amount of off-balance sheet items at places like J.P. Morgan, well, you name them, all the banks have staggering amounts of off-balance sheet derivatives. Even they don't know what they've got. So you're going to see plenty of bankruptcies. That's going to be a source of many bankruptcies going forward.
You know, as far as exchange controls go, everyone talks about the U.S., but couldn't they be imposed in countless countries?
No, they will be, especially when the U.S. sets the example. You know, it's already happening. Whenever the U.S. sets the example, people quickly follow. The U.S. recently in this decade has refused to let foreigners buy some U.S. assets. Next thing you know, the French are saying, well, you can't buy our companies. The U.S. is doing it, so we're not doing anything wrong. There are lots of people copy the U.S. So no, yeah, you're going to see exchange controls in a lot of places. This is not necessarily a great world we're looking forward to. I said before, we've got these great imbalances with assets in the East, in Asia, huge debts in the West, debts which can never be paid. Social unrest is going to get worse. As inflation gets worse, you're going to see more countries collapse. No, when those kind of things happen, one of the things that people always do, politicians always do, they always blame three groups of people. They blame foreigners, because foreigners don't vote or don't have a say. You know, it's easy to blame foreigners. They blame financiers, bankers, people with money, because everybody knows that bankers are evil and selfish and greedy, so it's easy to blame them, especially if they're foreign bankers. And then they always blame the press, because if the press didn't write about these problems, we wouldn't have these problems. So if you're a foreign banker journalist, you better move, because, those people are going to get serious attacks in the future, and there will be exchange controls in many parts of the world, especially if war breaks out, because during wartime, most places impose strict exchange controls.
Do you think Hong Kong is safe in all this?
Well, depends on where the war is, if the war comes. Yes.
Well, first there's exchange controls. That's one question. And then there's just more broadly, I guess I have a vested interest. I like Hong Kong and tend to spend some time there.
Well, I'm keen on Hong Kong, too. Hong Kong was on our short list of countries in which to live. We're not there. Obviously, we're in Singapore. But, no, Hong Kong, yes. The answer to your first question is it safe? Yes. Hong Kong would be high on my... If Singapore sank and fell into the sea tomorrow, we would probably move to Hong Kong, at least for a while. Yes, I see lots of reasons to have assets, including currency, including cash, including money in Hong Kong.
Okay, thanks. One last question, and that is a little philosophical and speculative, but what do you think the ultimate goal was of those who created the euro, and do you think they've succeeded in what they were trying to do, or are they now on the verge of failure? How do you think the euro is playing out?
Well, the ultimate goal was to have a single currency, which is brilliant. I mean, the world needs, the fewer currencies, the better if you have a unique geographic area. For the days before the euro, but every time you crossed a border or every time you sold goods, you had to change money. And my God, it was very expensive. The bankers loved it, especially the exchange bankers, because they made a lot of money. If you went from Portugal to Finland, my God, you had to change money a lot of times. Or if you drove a truck carrying merchandise from Portugal to Finland, it was a nightmare and an expense. So it was a very, very good idea. And also they hoped that it would bring peace to Europe, because then they wouldn't have these, if they all had an integrated economy, it was less likely they would go to war. And to have a real integrated economy, you have to have it's better to have a single currency. Now, it was a brilliant idea. Unfortunately, the execution has not been so brilliant. The original treaty, the Treaty of Maastricht, said everybody had to run a sound economy, low debt, low deficits, etc. Well, unfortunately, they all started using phony bookkeeping almost immediately, and then the bureaucrats in Brussels, got dazzled by their power, so they kept bringing in more and more countries with even more shady bookkeeping, less sound economies, and now they're paying the price. It was, as I say, a wonderful concept, but all the guys who conceived the euro are dead and signed the Treaty of Maastricht, are either dead or retired, and the new guys just want to buy votes. So no, I own the euro as we speak, but I don't know how long the euro will be around.
Okay, thank you, Jim. Next up is Green Meadow.
Hi, Jim. You have long said that you were in a bull market for tangible commodities and that a wise investment would be farmland. I mentioned this to my mother, and she told me that her grandfather told her to never invest in farming because it was too risky. Every season there's a chance to be wiped out. Currently, there's an increased talk of food shortages due to poor growing seasons. In much of the U.S., our farmland has been in either record drought or flooded out. South America had a cool late spring, which shortened their growing season. I think Russian wheat is going through a second year of drought. Canada is also having problems. How do you take weather into account when you're investing?
Well, I own the commodities themselves, so the more droughts, the better, from my point of view. Now, I say that tongue-in-cheek, obviously. Your great-grandfather was right. It is a dangerous, but your great-grandfather should have been around to learn about home building or subprime mortgages or the brokerage business. Lots of things that are dangerous and terrible, that are very risky, horribly risky. In my view, farming in the next 30 years is going to be extremely attractive, and finance is going down the tubes. We've had long periods, Green Meadow, in history when the financial people were in charge, and then we've had long periods when the producers of real goods were in charge. It's probably unbelievable to you, but the 50s, 60s, and 70s, Wall Street and the City of London were backwaters. I mean, the City of London was a wasteland. So was Wall Street in those periods. Then we had the big bull market starting in 1982, and now everybody is starting a hedge fund in his dorm room in the Ivy League. Whereas in my day, nobody wanted to go into finance. So we're having a reversal. In 1958, America graduated 5,000 MBAs. The rest of the world had none. Now, America's producing 200,000 MBAs, and the rest of the world has tens of thousands too. Huge competition at a time of staggering debts, when governments are coming down hard on financial types. Rules, regulations, taxes, everybody is trying to beat up on banks, brokers, etc. So finance is going down the tubes. So if your great-grandfather were around now, I think he would have a different view. At least I have a different view of farming now, because I see great opportunities. But, Green Meadow, you're right. If you're going to buy a farm, you better buy a farm where it rains. Because if it doesn't rain on your farm, the other farmers are going to get rich, and you're going to go broke. But I cannot tell you how positive I am about agriculture for some of the reasons we've discussed before. But again, from my point of view, I own the agricultural products themselves because I'm not a farmer and I wouldn't be any good at it. But if there are more problems in agriculture and mining and the rest, which I expect, the prices of cotton and wheat and rice and everything else is going to go through the roof.
Yeah. Yeah, I've actually seen articles of people who made money, with finances or stock market or whatever, are now investing in farming. But I've lived on farms in my life, and it'll take 2 or 3 years just to understand where the land floods, where the wind goes, just to understand the land. And I can't imagine, a financier buying acreage to invest in farming and being very successful.
Yeah, that's why I own the stuff itself. I know I wouldn't be any good at it. I mean, even if I married you, you did the farming. Doesn't sound like either one of us would be any good at it. So I'm sticking with the real stuff itself.
Wow. But have you noticed, at least it seems to me, that the weather has been very strange. And so even where it normally rains, it's not raining.
There's no question that throughout history, we've had some huge changes in weather. The geologists and scientists are always pointing this out. They cut down trees and they look at the rings, or they cut into glaciers, and they see there's been huge climate change throughout history. So it's not unusual that climate is changing. Whether it's good or bad, I don't know. But if it's changing, I know it's good for agriculture for many of the reasons that you've mentioned. So, again, I cannot tell you how bullish I am on agricultural products. If I haven't made myself clear, let me try again. Buy yourself, an agricultural index, or good farms, or good farmers, or good companies that are involved in the agricultural business. If you don't want to be a farmer yourself, buy yourself lake houses in Iowa or Oklahoma, or get the Lamborghini dealership in Nebraska. The stockbrokers are not going to be driving Lamborghinis anymore. They're going to be driving taxis. The smart stockbrokers will be driving tractors for the farmers who are going to be driving Lamborghinis. So get yourself the Lamborghini dealership in Omaha or Sioux City or someplace. Or as I said, send your kids to agricultural school. There are many ways to play this.
Yeah, I think people who know what they're doing with growing food are beginning to become more and more valuable.
Absolutely. At least I made myself clear to you.
Yes. Thank you.
That's a good point. Where was your farm?
I'm living in Oregon right now, but I also lived in Colorado and mostly have had horses and that kind of thing. But just dealing with wind and rain and mud and where you put your barn and that kind of stuff.
No. Well, you're learning some of the basic lessons. And you're right.
Yeah.
You got to know what you're doing or you're going to go broke. Well, I'm not a farmer. That's why I'm buying futures.
Yeah, and that makes it – I wasn't understanding that you were buying futures versus buying into the farm, and so that clears it up for me.
Well, I'm a director of a company which is buying land in Brazil and fixing it up and getting farmers to farm it. But my own portfolio is agricultural commodities.
That makes sense. Thank you.
But not horses, Green Meadow, not horses.
What they eat is called green stuff. It's called money.
Well, I know. That's what I'm saying. It sounds like you're a rich farmer, so somebody should marry you. But no, I'm not going to go out into the fields. I'm not any good at it.
Thanks.
Thanks, Green Meadow. Before we do our final question, just wanted to double check with Jim. You were not proposing to Green Meadow, were you, by any chance?
No. I'm sure I know she's rich just from listening, but no, I'm not. That was not a proposal.
Fantastic. That's great because I saw Green looking up some Mandarin instructor courses. Okay, our final question is from Rita. Mr. Rogers has built a career on knowing when to buy. If the American people are beginning a second lost decade, what should Americans with income and assets be doing, and what should young Americans with no income or assets be doing?
Well, young Americans with no assets or income should be moving to Asia, and first they should move to Asia and follow their own passions. If they love agriculture, they should become farmers. If they don't love agriculture, but they love finance, they should go into the financial markets, even though I see a bleak future there. I went into the financial markets in the middle of, very depressing times for finance. I went to Wall Street in 1964. 1964, a big day on the New York Stock Exchange with 3 million shares. Now they do 3 million shares before they wake up in the morning. The computer's already done 3 million shares. So it was a very bad time to go in finance, but I loved it. And so I did okay. So first they have to figure out their passions. Then they should go to Asia and pursue their passions. If I were they, and I would learn Chinese while I'm in Asia pursuing my passions. People with money should learn about investing abroad. They should learn about real assets. Everybody should have some of his money out of his or her own country, no matter what his or her own country is, as an insurance policy, if nothing else. Everybody has fire insurance. Well, you hope you never use your fire insurance. You hope your house never burns down. Look at your own country, whether it's Germany or Australia or America. Look at it the same way. Have some of your assets outside of your own country as an insurance policy, especially in the next couple of decades in the world I foresee, and learn about real assets. Because if I'm right, with all the currency debasement that's going to be going on, plus the fundamentals for commodities, which are very, very sound, very positive, supply is down, demand is up, you're going to have huge fortunes made in commodities. By the way, in the 1970s, stock markets and economies around the world were in the tank. Very little money was made in stocks, but commodities had one of the great bull markets of all time. So even if world economy goes bad, you can still make a fortune in commodities, or at least in the past you've been able to make fortunes in commodities, even when economies and stock markets in trouble.
We have just spoken with Jim Rogers at jimrogers.com. Thank you for your time tonight, Jim. Writer and management consultant Peter Drucker once said, "Long-range planning does not deal with future decisions, but with the future of present decisions. Each one of us is responsible for the future by making the right decisions now. And Jim, your information, which melds basic skills with a basic system of values to use those skills, is helping many people take control of their own future through good old-fashioned thinking for themselves. On behalf of Fox and all the members of the WebBot Forum, thank you, sir. In our tradition of pie loving and pie making, may you and your family have many pies to come."
Thank you, Jules. Thank all of you. It was great fun.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
Okay, very good. Well, I've had fun. Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks much.
Bye-bye.